Edward Said is a professor of English and comparative literature at Columbia University. He is the author of over 20 books, which encompass areas as far-ranging as music, literary criticism, and history. The Washington Post has said about him, his writing challenges and stimulates our thinking in every area. In addition to his academic career, he's perhaps best known as an outspoken advocate of Palestinian nationhood. His most recent book, called Power, Politics, and Culture, is a compilation of almost 30 interviews conducted over the course of his lifetime of teaching and writing. I'm pleased to welcome him back to this table for one of a number of appearances. And what an interesting cover this is. I mean, Power, Politics, and Culture, interviews with Edward Said, introduction by Gauri Viswanathan. Viswanathan.
She's an Indian scholar who used to be a student of mine, is now a colleague at Columbia.
Yeah. Right. First, how are you feeling? How's your health?
Well,
you're hanging in there?
Hanging in there. Yeah. Just sort of barely.
Well, it's nice.
It's tough.
It is
yeah,
tough.
It is, yeah. It's a daily battle. I mean, you know, the energy is always drained. Yeah. And I'm waiting for a new treatment now because I've exhausted all the old ones.
You know what they say? We can talk about this as much as you want to or not want to.
Yeah.
I mean, they say, I would assume if you have a life-threatening illness, you know, you live with the idea of holding on because you do not know, with medicine proceeding as fast as it is, what's around the corner.
Absolutely not. And you have to really, I think, the will counts for, I would say, most of it.
Do you think so?
Absolutely. Oh, I'm a living example of it. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think just the enjoyment of life, and the more you feel anchored in life, as opposed to, you know, a lot of people who get ill want to be invalids before their time. But I think the most important thing is to keep the work up as much as possible, and to live every day without a thought for the future. I mean, if a new day dawns and you can get through it, that's a bonus. And of course, the most important thing is to have a good doctor. There's no substitute for that.
A good
no,
doctor.
I mean, yeah,
who's on the cutting edge of knowing?
On the cutting edge, and whom if you have a chronic illness, you have to see a lot of it. You know, I've been with my doctor now for almost 9 years. Yeah. So you know, it's somebody you develop a lifetime relationship with, and it's crucial. There's no way of underestimating that. And you don't feel the need to look around. You don't need I don't feel anyway that I have to look at alternative treatments.
You don't need seven different opinions.
No, not at all. I gave that up a long time ago, and I don't look around for miracle cures. I mean, there's a lot of that going around. Yeah. Quacks who feed on people for that.
You're not going to fly off to some foreign country.
And the good thing about my doctor is that he's also an intellectual. He understands what I do, and his main concern is to give me as much quality in my life as possible without, you know, undue sort of interventions. Although I've had a lot of treatment, I mean, a huge amount of treatment.
Now, what your illness is?
Leukemia.
Leukemia.
Yeah.
And so it's what, chemotherapy or what?
Yeah, I've had everything. I've had chemotherapy. I've had radiation. I've had monoclonal antibody. I've had experimental treatments, and I mean the conventional treatments don't work on me anymore. I have a very kind of stubborn form of it.
Will makes a difference.
I think so. Yes. Will.
Does your doctor believe that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, if you're fighting the doctor in the sense that he's trying to keep you alive and you're trying to sort of rest or sink back, you know, then you're at cross purposes. Whereas if you both feel that you're in the thing together, I think that makes a lot of difference. Yeah.
You don't give up because?
Well, there are things that matter a lot to me. You know, I mean, work that I want to do. You know, the stuff that I write is important to me. My students, you know, the causes, family, of course. Families, I would say first. But the other things, you know, the causes that interest me. Now, for example, in the present crisis, I mean, one of the things that really tremendously bothers me is this sense of a tremendous gap between the world I come from and grew up in and the world I live in now. And that
What's the nature of the gap?
Well, the gap,
other than economic?
Oh, no, I think the gap is much more than that. It's cultural, it's political, it's, you know, just sort of two different, not really worlds, but they're just two sets of expectations, many sets of expectations, and languages that have very little in common, different value. All can be bridged, in my opinion. In other words, I don't think the crisis is simply a crisis of misunderstanding. I think that there is a lot that can be done by people who are familiar with both cultures and both worlds, and that can interpret one to the other. I think that's been very, very lacking.
Why?
Oh, there's a long history of it. I think the Islamic and Arab world has historically been, because of its adjacence to Europe and the West, it's always been felt as a threat. There's been a great colonial interest in that part of the world, now because of oil and strategy, and it's felt to be also centrally important because of the holy places, not just in Palestine, but also, of course, in Saudi Arabia for Muslims. The whole area is saturated with all kinds of significance. Everybody claims some part of it, historically or actually. And I think, there's also tremendous disparity in mode of life, in trajectory. People are going in one direction, and they go in another direction in another part of the world. And there's been a long and deep-seated conflict, which a lot of it comes from ignorance and misunderstanding.
Some will say, as Tom Friedman did today, talking in India, also democracy, it makes them different. That freedom and democracy would have been a powerful stimulus in the Arab world.
I'm second to none in my criticism of the absence of democracy.
I know you are.
In the Arab world, it's been very bad.
Yeah, and you've been also second to none in terms of a Palestinian.
Yes,
in your criticism of the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
For those reasons.
Yeah, and the others as well. I mean, the Egyptians, the Saudis,
right,
all of them.
Right.
I've taken them all on.
Fair to say.
I think that is a great problem. But I think another problem I think is the fact that most Americans, now speaking from this side, haven't really quite understood what the priorities and what the feelings and issues are for people in that part of the world. Or at least they don't take them seriously enough. I mean, that these are matters of great moment and issue to people. And one of them, I think, is Palestine. I mean, the sense that Palestine to most Arabs is a central and now deeply symbolic thing, that Palestinians are suffering, that they are simply prevented from attaining their self-determination and statehood, that they go through this daily ordeal under Israeli occupation for years, 35 years now, is a source of tremendous, I think it's a source of tremendous mystery as to why this should happen. Obviously, from the Israeli side, it's mysterious to me, because it certainly isn't going to lay up any love for the Israelis on the Arab side. And on the Arab side, it's understood that here, the United States and the Western world speaks about democracy and human rights and all the rest. How tolerate this situation, which is so glaring? I think there's a lot of anti-Americanism on the Arab side, which comes from a complete misunderstanding of America, as if America was the White House and the State Department and the Pentagon. That was it. Yeah. So no one has a sense of the complexity of our society here, that there are many currents in it, that the universities and the churches and the unions and so on all play an immense role in this.
This is not the time. Everybody always wants, when anybody says anything that they disagree with, they want me to launch into the rest of the program and in debate, which I'm not going to do. There is also the element, though, that Israel has reason to believe that there are Palestinians who do not recognize their desire to exist, and believe that if Israel did not have its power and U.S. support, would drive them into the sea.
I think,
and this has to do with perceptions.
Yeah, it does. This is here another thing of cross purposes.
Right.
For Palestinians, the central fact of their lives, no matter where they are, is the fact that they were uprooted and dispossessed in 1948 and still have no settled homeland. There are refugees, 4 million of them, sitting on the borders. There are the occupied territories, and there are 1.5 million Palestinians who are Israeli citizens who are second-class citizens. I would bet my last shirt on the following. The main problem for Palestinians is deeply emotional and political, but you please listen to me. I think for us, the major problem with Israel is not what Israel has done, but that the fact that it has never been acknowledged. I think what we need, I've spoken about this, by the way, with my friend Barenboim, whom I know was on recently.
And you two on together.
Yeah, exactly. That what we
Daniel
want,
Barenboim, the great Chicago Symphony pianist and conductor.
Pianist and conductor. what I think is needed, and I don't think peace will ever happen without this, is that an Israeli leader has to make a gesture of compassion and acknowledgement to the Palestinian people. All that we've gotten is a sense of, well, we have no responsibility for what happened. Everything you've done is your problem. Whereas what I think is absolutely necessary is that individuals do, but what we need is an acknowledgement from the Israeli government of responsibility for what happened to the Palestinian people. There's no secret about it. Everybody knows that the destruction of Palestinian society resulted in the establishment of Israel. It's as simple as that. You had to get rid of one society in order to plant another one. And all the stuff about the future of Israel,
well,
I think, could be settled.
What was possible in '48 would have been much better than,
but,
you know.
That's another subject into which we could go. I mean, the question of partition.
Right.
You know, but for most Palestinians, being asked when they were, roughly 70% of the population to accept 45% of the land and give over 55% to 30% of the population, it didn't seem right. But I think
I hear you
the
about
gesture,
compassion too.
Terribly important, and that the problem of the refugees, the problem of the occupation, all of these things will fall like ninepins.
If Ehud Barak was sitting here at this table, he would say, I made...
No, he didn't. No, of course not. Not in a private room. No. He has to say, look, I've read all the accounts of what happened in Camp David and elsewhere. There was, on the contrary, they didn't want to discuss the refugees.
But you see, here's the interesting thing about this. You're not the one to talk. I mean, I would say to you, and that you raise an important point. I would also say to you, are you prepared? Are you prepared to suggest that the leadership, Palestinian leadership, has failed?
Oh, absolutely.
And you are. So you're not the one to have an argument with, because you have been at odds with Arafat for.
Oh, no, I'm at odds with Arafat from the very beginning. I mean, there are basic principles that I believe in this struggle. But I think, and I've gone on a record. I don't say that in America only. I say it over there to Palestinians, that the only hope for the Jews of Israel and the Palestinians of Palestine, the Arabs, is some form of coexistence. There's no other way. The place is too small. But their lives and histories are too involved with each other.
I hear you on the compassion, but do you understand how in Israel there is the feeling that Palestinians do not want them there, and if they were stronger, would not allow them to be there and would drive them out?
But then the question is, why is that so? And how long can you keep against a people's will to keep them down, to beat them down, to kill them? 5 Palestinians were killed yesterday, Charlie. The occupation is the most brutal military occupation imaginable. Palestinians cannot live in this fashion.
That's part of the reason that Yitzhak Rabin was prepared to go where he did.
But we're not talking about Sharon. Sharon is the prime minister.
I understand that. Well, let me move ahead to the United States, because there are other things to talk about, and I have great respect for you and also for the issues that you raise. This point, Colin Powell yesterday in Kentucky made a speech, which I talked about with George Mitchell last night on this program.
Yeah, I saw it. Try to watch you all the time.
Thank you. What did you think of Powell mainly?
I thought it was an important speech. First of all, there had been a taboo for a long time in using the word Palestine. And he used the word Palestine.
Well, George Bush used it at the United Nations.
As did Bush, exactly. Second,
two states living side by side.
Exactly. Second, to talk about a viable Palestinian state with acknowledged borders seems to me a terribly important thing for a high American official to have said, obviously with the agreement of the president. And third, and from my point of view, most important in terms of the present context, he was the first American in a long time to talk about the need for the end of occupation. The Palestinians cannot go on living.
And Powell did it in his speech.
Powell, that's what I'm saying. Powell said it in his speech. So that's tremendously important. Now, a lot of Palestinian criticism was, as I read it in the next day, was that he didn't say enough. But I think from what my reading, which is always optimistic, of the speech is that the implication is that now we're going to involve ourselves in getting to that point. In other words, once you state that this is perhaps the goal, then you can begin to work towards it, rather than say, well, we don't really have a goal, but we're trying to get people to run the table.
I think so.
You agree with that?
I do, absolutely. Yeah. I do, because I believe it because I agree with it because I think, I think there's certain resistance. I mean, there are, and understandable, these are matters of high import, and there are people who come down on it, who very well come down on it with one side, with stronger feelings. Tilting one way or the other.
Yes.
And I mean by that, then there are some people within this administration, I'm sure, who feel like the violence has to stop, period. Right. And that violence hasn't been the answer, and there are other people who strongly feel that as long as there are occupation, there will always be violence. And so you've got...
And counter-violence, and there's literally no end to it. And I think, that rather than... and I think that was the problem with the 10 years of Oslo, since 93 until roughly now. The Palestinian situation, the condition got worse. And as several Israeli friends told me, most Israelis were not aware of it. They thought, well, we have peace, so what are they complaining about? But in fact, Palestinians got poorer, they could move around less, more of their land was taken, their houses were destroyed, their olive trees were destroyed, many of them were killed, put in jail, etc. So the situation got worse. I think now if you have, as the Powell speech indicates, you have the beginning of a new climate that suggests this is the general line we want to take towards a Palestinian state, towards two states living side by side in some harmonious way, at the end of the road, then I think these fears, I think will dissipate, or at least be largely reduced. That's the most one can hope for, but it's substantial. I think one has to be able to feel optimistic.
You feel optimistic?
Yeah, because nothing else. If
you don't feel optimistic, then what is it about?
Yeah, exactly. The situation is so desperate for Palestinians that
desperate. Well, just lots of people have lost lives.
Yes,
lots
exactly.
and lots of people have lost lives.
I know. But we're talking about a defenseless people, basically, Charlie. We're talking about people who don't have an army, who don't have tanks, who don't have F-16s, helicopters, who are at the mercy of an army. That if it gets angry, they can do what they did yesterday. They go into a refugee camp in Gaza and destroy 20 homes. That's on a micro level. This is torture for people to live in conditions like that. And I think watching it is very, very hard for all of us, and not only for us, but for most of the world outside of America.
Why do you think, in the end, I'm long on this, and I want to move to other things. Why do you think, in the end, Arafat did not accept the offer that most people believe
he should have accepted?
Yes.
I think there were too many problems with it. I think when you're given an offer that is more or less take it or leave it. In other words, this is the final offer. I think that if you're given an offer where you have no boundaries with any Arab country except that Israel surrounds you, that the 3 or 4 large bits of territory are discontiguous from each other, if Israel controls exits and entrances, too much is left in Israel's hand, then you turn it down. Now, my complaint is not that he turned it down, but that he turned it down without giving an alternative. If I was in his place, I'd have said, look, this is no good for the following reasons. This is what we have to address, and keep it going, and try to put that case forward.
He says he found no negotiating partner there.
But there's always a negotiating position. But that was the mistake.
No, he said that he found, what Barak says, time and time again, is he found no negotiating partner there.
I think that's probably true.
There's some debate within, some of the Palestinians will say,
But Arafat is such a genius at sort of manipulating people that the negotiators on their own could do nothing. He really is the final sort of court of appeal. And if
what
he
happens when he goes?
A mess. There's a designated successor or two, but there are too many rival groups. There are too many contenders, I think.
Is he losing?
He's lost a lot
of authority and
he's lost a lot of popularity. The latest Palestinian poll shows that his popularity is about 17 or 18% now, which is very
And what about Hamas?
Hamas has never increased. It's roughly the same. It's always between 50.
Characterize Hamas for me.
Hamas is largely in Gaza. It's an Islamic group that hopes to establish a Palestinian Islamic state, which is a hopeless proposition, just as all the Islamist ideas in the Arab world are hopeless, to establish Islamic states, whatever that means.
And you're not a Muslim.
Well, it's not only that. I'm also very, very secular. I wouldn't want a Christian state either, if you see what I mean. Or, for that matter, any kind of theocratic state. I think they are basically a welfare and education organization with military pretensions that will do acts of resistance up to suicide bombing just to keep their case alive. But I think the battle for hearts and minds...
a suicide bomb in a pizza shop an act of resistance?
Well, they think it is. I mean, it's a tremendously wasteful and something that one has to condemn.
Well, in the same way is bulldozing somebody's home.
Yeah, I mean, all these acts...
A necessary act on the part of an army.
Yeah, they're terminal acts. I mean, nothing can come from them, you know. So in that respect, I think they feel as hopeless as everybody else does in this context. But I think that one shouldn't overestimate their attractiveness to young people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Edward Said, my friend.
Thanks.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Edward Said is a professor of English and comparative literature at Columbia University. He is the author of over 20 books, which encompass areas as far-ranging as music, literary criticism, and history. The Washington Post has said about him, his writing challenges and stimulates our thinking in every area. In addition to his academic career, he's perhaps best known as an outspoken advocate of Palestinian nationhood. His most recent book, called Power, Politics, and Culture, is a compilation of almost 30 interviews conducted over the course of his lifetime of teaching and writing. I'm pleased to welcome him back to this table for one of a number of appearances. And what an interesting cover this. Talk about this as much as you want to or not want to.
Yeah.
I mean, they say, I would assume if you have a life-threatening illness,
yes,
you know, you live with the idea of holding on because you do not know, with medicine proceeding as fast as it is, what's around the corner.
Absolutely not. And you have to really, I think, the will counts for, I would say, most of it.
Do you think so?
Absolutely. I'm a living example of it. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think just the enjoyment of life, and the more you feel anchored in life, as opposed to, a lot of people who get ill want to be invalids before their time.
I mean, Power, Politics, and Culture interviews with Edward Said. Introduction by Gauri Viswanathan.
Viswanathan. She's an Indian scholar who used to be a student of mine, is now a colleague at Columbia.
Yeah. First, how are you feeling? How's your health?
Well,
you're hanging in there?
Hanging in there.
Yeah.
Just sort of barely.
Well, it's
tough.
It is tough.
It is, yeah. It's a daily battle. I mean, the energy is always drained.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting for a new treatment now because I've exhausted all the old ones.
You know what they say? We can.
But I think the most important thing is to keep the work up as much as possible, and to live every day without a thought for the future. I mean, if a new day dawns and you can get through it, that's a bonus. And of course, the most important thing is to have a good doctor. There's no substitute for that.
A good
no,
doctor.
I mean, yeah,
who's on the cutting edge of knowing.
Cutting edge, and if you have a chronic illness, you have to see a lot of it. I've been with my doctor now for almost 9 years.
Yeah.
So it's somebody you develop a lifetime relationship with, and it's crucial. There's no way of underestimating that. And you don't feel the need to look around. You don't need I don't feel anyway that I have to look at alternative treatments.
You don't need seven different opinions.
No, not at all. I gave that up a long time ago, and I don't look around for miracle cures. I mean, there's a lot of that going around. Yeah. Quacks who feed on people for that.
You're not going to fly off to some foreign country for some.
And the good thing about my doctor is that he's also an intellectual. He understands what I do, and his main concern is to give me as much quality in my life as possible without, undue sort of interventions. Although I've had a lot of treatment.